Please subscribe to hear more Cryptid Tales. If you like the story you heard, give us a thumbs up and feel free to leave us a comment. If you'd like to hear your own cryptid encounter on Cryptid Tales, send us an email at cryptidtalesmail@gmail.com. Texas, 2004. Sabine River Bottoms. I was hog hunting from a tree stand next to the Sabine River. I had gone to my stand around 5:30 a.m., put out sliced apples and table scraps to hold the hogs there for a few minutes for a shot. I got in my tree stand and waited for the woods to settle down and the sun to rise. At sunup, I heard hogs rooting around, working the river's edge towards me. I could first see them to my left at about 45 degrees, about 50 yards out. No clear shot, waiting for them to get to my bait area, I noticed movement to my right, about 80 yards out. Putting my rifle scope on it, I could see only the side of something's face. It was dark, hair-covered, and slowly moving its head around looking in the direction of the hogs. At this time, it quickly moved to another tree. I could see most of its body. It was huge, standing on two legs, slowly looking around the tree at the hogs. At this time, I was quite afraid but tried to keep my scope on it to study its features. The hogs were still feeding towards my bait area, and the animal was working towards the hogs. It moved quickly and disappeared. It quickly reappeared, moving to another tree, still looking at the hogs. I could again study its features. At this time, I was quite afraid but tried to keep my scope on it. Its movement from tree to tree was a quick leap, landing at the base of the next tree on 2 feet. Standing behind the tree and slowly looking around at the hogs. This continued for several minutes until they were about 30 yards apart and almost directly in front of me at about 40 yards. The animal dropped to all fours, bunched up its rear legs, and leaped. It took 2 leaps to reach the hogs, and it screamed during the second leap, causing the hogs to panic for a split second. The second leap ended with it slapping one hog on its side, knocking it through the air into the side of a tree. As the squealing hog bounced off the tree, it pounced on it, beating it with fists like a person pounding on a desk. I could hear bones crunching with each hit. All this happened very fast, about 4 seconds from first leap to dead hog. The quickness of the attack was very unnerving. The 3 live hogs were in full flight. The animal picked up the dead hog, tucked it under its arm, and started walking off, and let out a noise like a deep growl that changed into a series of long, drawn-out whoops. It was immediately answered from about 200 to 300 yards out by a shorter series of whoops. After a couple more steps in the direction of the answer, it stopped, dropped the hog, and turned to look past me. It turned back to my tree and raised its head to look at me. I have never been more afraid in my life. I tried to keep the scope on its head in case it came after me. It looked at me and cocked its head to one side. Its face had a curious expression as if studying me. It opened its mouth, showing its teeth, letting out a soft growl sound. It then turned back to pick up the hog and walked off in no hurry as if I didn't exist. I was looking through a 3x9 scope, originally set on 3 power for the hunt, but I had turned it up to the 9 power after first trying to see the object approaching from my right. After that time, I was afraid to make the movements necessary to take the scope off the 9 power. I sat in the tree stand for another 30 minutes or so, trying to calm myself. after concluding that if it had wanted me, it would have already slapped me out of the tree stand. I got down and went to find my hunting partner, who was about a quarter to a half mile away. He had heard the attack scream and both whooping calls. It was 7 or 8 feet tall, standing like a human on 2 legs, covered in hair, and intensely watching the hogs. Its hands and feet looked human. It had breasts. Its ears seemed small for the size of its head. Very tall, very heavily built female, similar to most Bigfoot pictures / drawings that one sees. The face was human-like, a thick coat of hair, reddish-brown, covering most of its body except the hands, feet, and half of the face. The eyes were solid brown. Investigator's Notes. I have spoken with the witness on several occasions regarding this report, as he saw it for a longer time than most people, and I had many questions. I found him to be a very credible witness, with quick answers to my questions, and all the facts are the same when I re-questioned him on some points. Since neither of us can draw pictures, I showed him a picture from the website and asked him for a comparison. This is what he said. Only the size and height are correct. The hands were different, more like ours, only the thumb was set back further on the hand. It had fingernails, not claws, yellowish in color. The hair was lighter, more of a reddish brown. The eyes had no white. They were solid dark brown. It was a female. It had breasts, only the nipple area was hairless. The feet had 5 toes, set wide apart with long toenails, also yellowish. It walked away with a stoop-shouldered gait when it walked off. Its arms and legs were much larger and bulkier. Its hair was shorter, about 3 inches long, just enough to flap when it moved. It had no waistline. The waist was the same large bulk as the upper body. It had flat teeth like a human, no fangs. The face was human-looking. It showed expression while looking at me. All the other views were to the animal's side, except I had a back view before it disappeared walking off. It was a female. It had breasts, only the nipple area was hairless. The hair on its breast was much shorter and thinner than the rest of the body. Comparing the breasts to those depicted in the Patterson film, they were not that large. They did not swing when it moved. Its hair was shorter, about 3 inches long, just enough to flap when it moved. There were a few leaves, twigs, and debris tangled in the hair, as if it had rolled or slept on the ground. Its large size combined with its incredible speed made it frightening. It made no sound while stalking the hogs. There was no odor. The woods had normal noise while it was stalking the hogs. Squirrels were feeding, paying no attention to hogs or the animal. Birds, frogs, crickets, everything making normal noises. After the attack scream, all the woods went quiet. All noise ceased. No sound of any kind except from the animal and its answering call. Most of the time, it would use its hands to steady itself when looking around the tree. The hogs were all small, in the 100 to 125 pound range. It carried the hog under its arm, much as a person would carry a sack of potatoes. When it crouched down on all fours, it curled its fingers and had its knuckles on the ground. Additional comments from the investigator. The site was located while motorboating to his normal hunting area. The witness noticed sign of hogs rooting along the river's edge and stopped to check it out. The witness decided it was a better place to try, scouted the area, decided on stand locations, and returned the next morning to set up and hunt. The tree stand height was about 25 feet. The witness was wearing camo, plus a mosquito head net. The length of the encounter is an estimate of 20 minutes. It was not timed. Bear in mind that the witness's adrenaline was up, his fear factor was up, and in such cases, time sometimes does get compressed. The attack leap's distance was about 30 yards, 15 yards per leap. This was on all fours. All the tree-to-tree movements were two-legged jumps, landing on 2 feet, anywhere from 5 to 10 feet. Each movement going closer to the feeding hogs. Each movement, the animal was holding its body very still, slowly moving sideways just enough to look around the tree. All those movements and landings were totally silent. The witness said the first set of whoops were similar to the Sierra sounds, but not quite the same, and was really not able to explain the difference. The second set of whoops had a garbled sound at the end of each whoop. The third set of whoops were way different. Bear in mind that this happened just seconds after the unexpected quick kill of the hog. The witness was very unnerved at that time. After finding his hunting partner, they returned together to the site to retrieve the tree stand and found disturbed ground where it leapt both times, and disturbed ground at the kill site, plus a small amount of blood that apparently came from the hog's mouth. The ground was covered in normal damp leaves, and there were no footprints found at the site. This is only the second time in 37 years that I have ever said anything about what I experienced while hunting one year when I was a kid. As a young boy, my father and I would hunt together for deer at a hunting camp we belonged to, deep in the state game lands of east central Pennsylvania. This particular time, we were all up late, and the old guys in the camp were cheating me out of my jar of nickels playing cards. I finally got to bed about 2 a.m. My dad woke me up at 5 to head out to the spot he wanted to hunt. It was about an hour walk through heavy mountain laurel. We finally crossed a ridge line and came to a huge thick patch of laurel with a set of game trails crisscrossing the area near it. There was a small opening in the laurel big enough for me to slide into that gave me a view of a trail that split into 2 trails almost right in front of me, with one heading down over the ridge and the other paralleling the laurel. The leading trail to my right curved back around the laurel patch, and I could only see about 15 feet of that trail, and the part to my left that split into 2 gave me a great view of the split and the trails leading off the ridge, and the one that hugged the laurel patch. I got settled and watched my dad head off down the trail that ran along the laurel patch. A light snow started, and it muffled most of the forest sounds, and within minutes I was sound asleep. I woke up with kind of a startled feeling, thinking my dad will be mad as hell if he catches me sleeping. The snow had stopped, and I faintly heard a sniffling type sound. Almost like something was heavily smelling the air, but with a clogged nose. It was coming up from my right slightly over my right shoulder. I couldn't see far because the trail curved so much around the laurel on that side. I thought maybe it was a buck sniffing for a doe, or maybe a black bear looking for food. It was late in the year for a bear, so I was really hoping for a buck. I took the safety off of my .308 and cracked the bolt to make sure I had a bullet in the chamber and waited. I could hear it getting closer, and the sniffing got louder, but it was odd because it almost sounded like it was also lightly growling. So now I thought it was probably a bear. I squeezed back into my little opening and held my rifle up, kind of at a ready. It was getting closer, and I was a little scared because I was not sure which it was, a buck or a bear. Then I heard it growl, just as it stepped into a spot that I could see it through the leaves in the laurel. A doe blasted out of the laurel 20 feet to my left. It must have been bedded down the whole time I was there, and didn't even see it, but thank God it was, because the thing I saw scared me so bad I froze and almost screamed. It was huge. My father was 6'2" and weighed close to 300 pounds and was a heavyweight wrestler for many years, and this thing dwarfed my dad. It had legs so thick they seemed bigger than my whole body, and its back and shoulders were thicker than any bodybuilder in my muscle and fitness magazines at home. This thing was definitely hunting, and when that doe burst out, his whole attention was on it. It didn't run after it, but its body tensed, and it let out a deep growl. The doe must have heard it because I heard the doe bleat in fear. Thank God that doe jumped out, because if not, that thing would have seen me for sure, and I probably would have been its meal that day. It quickly moved the direction the doe went, but it didn't run. As it went past, I had a side view of its face. Its skin looked like my baseball glove leather, only a little darker with some heavy creases in it. It had a huge kind of flat nose with what looked like snot around it. But the thing that really caught my attention was its ear, or what I figured was its ear. It was just like a small hole in the side of its head with barely any skin around it. Almost like what an ear would look like if it had been ripped off with barely any skin or earlobe left behind. It hurried down the trail after the doe, and I finally took a breath. I was scared to death and didn't want to budge in case it would hear me. As it left my sight, I was afraid for my dad. He went down that same trail. About 3 or 4 minutes later, I heard a shot followed by another about 10 seconds later, and then nothing. I wanted to yell out for my dad but was scared, so I waited. About 40 minutes later, I heard noises coming from the trail that my dad and that thing had went down, and I crunched down tight because anything coming that direction back up the trail would see me. So I got my rifle ready to shoot if it was that thing again. I was going to shoot it before it even had a chance to see me or come at me. Then I saw my dad coming up the trail dragging a buck. I ran out to him and got as close to him as I could without tripping him and started crying. He kind of got mad at me. He thought I was crying because of him killing the deer. I didn't tell him what I saw because I knew he would tell me to knock it off and stop crying. I helped him drag the deer back to camp with my head on a swivel and with the feeling that we were being followed almost all the way back to the camp. I couldn't wait to get into the cabin. That night I barely slept. I spent most of the night looking out of the upstairs window that was next to my bed. The next morning, the usual bitching from the guys cooking breakfast, complaining that the bears were into the spring house again and that they ate the eggs and the raw sausage that was for breakfast. I never said a word, but I knew it wasn't a bear that ate it. That was the last year I went to the hunting camp. I made sure I had an airtight excuse why I couldn't go there the next few years, and by then I had decided I no longer wanted to hunt deer. Looking back at that day, it is burned into my memory. That thing was probably every bit of 8 feet tall, and comparing it to the pigs at my granddad's farm, it had to weigh close to 700 pounds, maybe even more. It smelled like a wet dog, and kind of like that black mud in a pond. I have never been back to the camp, and probably never will.